or later. Okay. Good evening to everyone. My name is Jane Dolan. I'm the president of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. Welcome to this virtual hearing on the update of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan 2022. We appreciate that you're all here, all of us. This public hearing, as we all know, is virtual only. Many of you will be on Zoom, but we also provided the conference call for that. So I want you to know we'll do some introductory items at this point. I will briefly review the agenda. We have a time on our agenda for people to just say something that is not related to the topic tonight, and then we will proceed to the plan. So at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing. I'm going to ask our board clerk, Ryan Jones, if he would call the roll so we can determine if there is a board quorum and which board members are present. Mr. Jones.
Board Member Grego.
Here.
Board Member Ramirez.
Here.
Board Member Countryman. Board Member Countryman is absent. Secretary Johnson.
I'm here. Good evening, everybody.
Vice President Valines.
I'm here.
President Dolan.
I'm here. So that places us with 5 board members present. We have one who at this point is absent, and we have a vacancy. So we do have a quorum. So thank you all. The way that this will proceed is that we will have, I think I've already reviewed the agenda. We'll have public comment, and then we will have an introduction and an overview of the plan update, and then we will move to asking for comments. The way that will be done is that our board clerk, Ryan Jones, is going to be monitoring the web. Those of you who are on Zoom, if you wish to make a comment, use the raise hand. He will know then that it's there with your name, and he will provide those names to me 2 at a time. One to be the first one to speak, the second to be next in line. And so we'll roll that forward 2 at a time. And then if by chance there are people who have called in after I've called on those who are on Zoom with the raised hand, I'll call on those who are doing it through the telephone. If you're on the phone and you wish to speak, you hit *9. That's equivalent to raising the hand, and then we'll know you want to speak. There are other ways for you to make comments, and that we will provide that at a couple times during this hearing of how to submit by email, to submit by writing, and to whom and to how. There is, of course, a chat function, but I want you to know we're not responding to chats unless it's a technical issue. Anything put in the chat would just be between you all. It's not considered a comment for the plan. You would need to speak or send us something in writing. So hopefully that's clear. Did I follow all the instructions I needed to? Did that sound correct, Ruth? Okay.
Yes, it does, President Dolan.
All right, thank you. So we've done our welcome, we've done our roll call, we have a quorum. The agenda is pretty simple, so I'll go to an item that's called public comment. At this point, I ask if there's someone present who wants to say something that is not related to the topic tonight, and for which we will just receive and not comment. Is there any sort of interest to say something that I just described? Jason Sidley, your hand's up. Okay, I don't hear anyone, so we'll proceed. The singular and central important item of this evening is a presentation, an overview, and receipt of comments on the draft 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. I'm going to ask Ruth Darling, Program Manager of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board staff, to introduce and set this item up for presentation. Ms. Darling.
Thank you, President Dolan. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ruth Darling with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and this will be our third public hearing on the public draft of the 2022 CVFPP update. So public hearings are in compliance with the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008 that states DWR shall prepare and the board shall adopt the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. The act also states that the board shall hold at least 2 public hearings to receive comments on the proposed plan. One of those hearings should be in the Sacramento Basin and one of those hearings should be in the San Joaquin Basin. So we held a public hearing in Stockton on May 12th at 6 p.m. in the evening. We held a public hearing in Sacramento on May 16th at 10 a.m. And this is our virtual only public hearing. We wanted to cast a wide net of attendees. And we know that with the current state of the world, many more people are joining virtually. So thank you for being here this evening. And in addition, after the public comment period ends on June 6th, that's a 45-day public comment review period. And once public comments are received, either through the public hearing process or via email or in writing, DWR and Flood Board staff will work on capturing those comments, organizing those comments, and the Flood Board will then hold public workshops in July and August to essentially workshop those comments. The Flood Board has the ability to make changes on the proposed plan to resolve any issues raised in hearings or to respond to comments received by the board. And the board is required to post those proposed changes to the plan at least 2 weeks before adoption of the flood plan. So those public workshops are really an effort to work with the public on potentially revisions to the plan for the final. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleagues at DWR, Mary Jimenez and Jason Sidley, to walk through a presentation of the flood plan. Mary?
This is President Dolan. Let me just interject. I think people are still joining and listening in, so I want to just reiterate that we're going to have a presentation overview of the plan, and then people who are joining us online or by phone will be allowed to have comments at the end of that. So sorry for that interruption. Ms. Jimenez.
All right, thank you very much, President Dolan. Good evening, everyone. This is Mary Jimenez with the Department of Water Resources. Pleased to be logged on this evening with Jason Sidley, also from the Department of Water Resources, to provide this overview of the public draft of the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. I wanted to begin this evening by acknowledging that the state of California, including our Central Valley, is in an extreme drought right now. That being said, it's important to recognize that flooding can occur even during drought years, and that it's only a matter of time before our weather pattern in California swings from the drought that we're in towards a weather pattern with more extreme flood conditions. Among the key findings of this 2022 update to the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is that our flood system in the Central Valley is increasingly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and these associated swings between drought and flood that we're all experiencing. And so given that urgent and growing threat, it's important that we act swiftly to develop and implement flood management solutions that cross traditionally siloed water sectors, such as ecosystems, groundwater, and water supply. We must invest boldly in our Central Valley flood management system over the next 30 years. It's a long-term effort. We must build and leverage each agency partner's unique capacity for funding and advocacy, and work together and with our Central Valley's most vulnerable communities to ensure that they are not left behind in our efforts moving forward. Next slide, please. And so the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is the state's strategic blueprint for flood risk management in the Central Valley. This is the second update of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in 2022. The first update was adopted by the Central Valley Flood Protection Board in June 2012. Development of this 2022 update to the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in calendar year 2022 specifically fulfills the requirements of the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008. Next slide, please. This 2022 update to the flood plan includes a suite of important and related documents, the major ones you'll see here on the slide. In addition to the flood plan itself, DWR is preparing an addendum to the Programmatic Environmental Impact Report from the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, excuse me. The addendum will be made available along with the final version of the 2022 flood plan later this year, and will reflect any changes made to the CVFPP as a result of response to the public comments that we're going to receive. Next slide, please. And so the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan as a system-wide flood plan in the Central Valley is a descriptive type document and does not represent specific decisions on for funding or permitting projects that are implemented consistent with the plan. It prioritizes the state's investment in flood management over the next 30 years. And doing so also promotes multi-benefit projects and describes ways to integrate and improve ecosystem functions associated with flood risk reduction projects. Next slide, please. This 2022 update to our flood plan is centered around 3 primary themes that are woven throughout the public draft, including building flood system climate resiliency, increasing accountability and adaptation through performance tracking of investments, and strengthening integration and alignment between the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and flood management effort and flood management investments with other state water management planning efforts. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll pause and get ready to hand over to Jason Sidley if he's ready. Thank you.
I am ready. Thank you very much, Mary. Just want to verify everyone can hear me.
Yes.
All right, excellent. You never know with these days. As Mary and Ruth mentioned, my name is Jason Sidley. I'm with the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives, and I'm going to walk us through the public draft in this presentation. So the slide you see in front of you is the layout of the public draft, the 4 chapters, as well as a few other pieces that make up this public draft. So as I mentioned, it is 4 chapters, very similar to the way the 2017 plan or update was laid out. The first chapter being that context setting piece. What are we doing with this update? And what are those themes, as Mary highlighted a slide ago, about innovation, accountability, and collaboration? And then we dive into chapter 2, which is that implementation progress. What are the things that have been done with regards to implementing structural, non-structural projects, policy recommendation, improvements that have been made, improvements to the technical and climate change information, just kind of looking back at what's been done since 2017. Chapter 3 then drives us towards what needs to be updated. What are those priority actions and intended outcomes that still need to be achieved over the next 30 years, that big picture look. And then chapter 4 is that investment strategy and imperative act. How are we going to implement these priority actions and achieve these intended outcomes? In addition, in between chapters 2 and 3, what you'll see in the public draft are 2-page regional overviews, one for each of the regional flood management planning regions. They're to be treated as inserts. There's 2 pages. You can pull them out. A region can pull them out, use them to advocate or show progress that's being made or progress that needs to be made in the region. The DWR planning team worked with the RF&Ps over the past couple of months to develop these, and they truly are the flavor of the region in this document. Additionally, we have 3 appendices that accompany the document. The first appendix A, as we call it, the background appendix, that takes a lot of that evergreen content that you would typically see in the 2012 and 2017 plan with regards to what is the history of the state system-wide investment approach, what's the history of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and takes that and puts it into appendix, which allows us to, chapter 1, to dive right into the update itself. This is an appendix that'll grow over subsequent updates. Appendix B is the legislative reference and reader's guide. So that provides an overview of how the CVFPP and supporting documents meet the requirements of the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008, as Mary highlighted a couple slides ago. And then Appendix C is the supplemental recommendations, provides supporting recommendations and details to the content that is provided in Chapter 3 of the document. At the beginning of the document, you'll find a couple of placeholders, one for the forwards, those letters that'll be accompanying the final adopted piece, one from the DWR director and one from Board President Dolan. In addition, there'll be a call to action infographic, which will be a 2-page, what needs to be done right away? What are those really high priority things that need to be done in the short term? So you'll see that those 2 items will be developed between the board and DWR through the public process as we move towards adoption. Next slide, please. So diving into the chapters, consistent with the recommendations from the 2017 update, the 2022 update will focus on the three themes of climate resilience, performance tracking, and integration and alignment with other state water management plans and efforts. Some of the highlights of chapter 1 are the flood risk in the Central Valley is among the highest in the nation. The CVFPP updates are consistent with previous plans. These are not new plans, but build upon the excellent work that was done for 2012 and the 2017 update. Planning and implementation with a lens across the watershed and incorporating additional water sector benefits can help address the extreme weather events we experience in California. As Mary highlighted a little bit earlier, we're in a historic drought, but those floods could follow soon along and typically do with droughts. Approximately 1.3 million people and $223 billion in property are protected by a state plan of flood control facilities. Additionally, building on the outcome-based performance tracking effort from 2017, the 22 update will continue progressing towards tracking performance of plan investments to an aligned set of intended outcomes, and continuing to look at ways to provide other benefits that could be achieved while developing multi-benefit projects. And then the narrative that you'll see throughout the document is that in spite of all the investments that have been made, flood risk remains high, native species continue to decline across the region, a lot of this being accelerated by projected growth and climate change. And this will continue to exacerbate unless quick, effective actions are taken. Next slide, please. Developing a flood management solutions that are watershed-based is imperative as we look at ways to adapt to the effects of climate change on the flood system. This is highlighted in chapter 1, this discussion. Updating the portfolio of potential improvements for the state system-wide investment approach, which was developed as part of the 2012 plan as the foundation of the CVFPP, will provide a portfolio that is reasonable, balanced, and cost-effective, using information from not only DWR implementation programs, but as information developed as part of the regional flood management planning effort in 2022. The 2022 update also begins the discussion and begins discussing and highlighting inequities in the flood management system in the Central Valley. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 provides that early progress. What's the early progress that's been made in implementing the state system-wide investment approach? Shows how we've effectively leveraged state funds that have been received for those highest priority activities through DWR's flood management programs. A couple of highlights on the slide. Since 2007, we've spent $3.5 billion in state funds has been spent, with another $500 million that have been committed and are currently being expended on projects. Approximately 361 miles of urban and 120 miles of non-urban SPFC levees have been repaired, rehabilitated, or improved. Since 2017, we've established the Flood Maintenance Assistance Program with dedicated funding. One-time allocations, deferred maintenance, and emergency repairs funding of approximately $200 million over the past few years. We've received appropriations of about $2.4 billion in federal funding for U.S. Army Corps of Engineer flood projects. And then we've begun funding early system-wide multi-benefit projects such as the Yolo Bypass and other small community studies. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 also focuses on progress on partnerships, including the Yolo Bypass Cash Flow Partnership, as well as other collaborative efforts such as work on updating and refining a flood management strategy for the San Joaquin River. Implementation progress on many of the multi-benefit and restoration projects being undertaken in the regions are also highlighted in Chapter 2. A couple project spotlights you'll find in Chapter 2, one on the Southport Levee Setback Project that was recently completed, and then the Hamilton City Flood Damage Reduction and Ecosystem Restoration Project. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 also highlights the progress that has been made on other technical efforts since 2017, including the refined climate change analysis that has been undertaken as part of the 2022 update. It also discusses progress that has been made on the outcome-based performance tracking framework, including the work on tracking progress towards the conservation strategy measurable objectives. And then finally, Chapter 2 discusses the many efforts that have been in progress to align with other DWR planning programs and make the implementation of the CVFPP more effective, including how we align with the governor's water resiliency portfolio. Next slide, please. So Chapter 3 discusses the current understanding of the various implementation actions broken into those 4 buckets you saw in 2017 of system-wide, urban, rural, and small communities that are needed for the state system-wide investment approach over the next 30 years. It also highlights the various priorities and long-term outcomes from not only the state's perspective, but those regional perspectives also. The priorities highlighted in Chapter 3 are consistent with the 2012 CVFPP. There are several project spotlights in Chapter 3, including one on the Yellow Bypass Cash Slough program, a new Bullard's Bar atmospheric river control spillway, the regional flood management strategy for the San Joaquin River Basin, and Black Rascal Creek flood control project. These spotlights, you might hear a couple similar projects from Chapter 2. These spotlights are taking a more of a forward look as to what needs to be done in these areas. Also part of the portfolio of actions discussed are the various recommendations associated with the policy issues. The 2017 update developed a set of policy issue categories and recommendations to help remove impediments to implementation. The 2022 update takes those, keeps moving those categories forward and also adds 2 additional policy issue categories. One surrounding climate change and another focusing on equity in the planning and implementation of our flood management system. Next slide, please. Chapter 3 includes the results of the technical analyses that were undertaken as part of the 2022 update effort. We built upon the body of technical work developed in the 2017 by refining the climate change analysis and also by incorporating new tools to help evaluate expected annual life loss. The top line results are that implementation of the state system-wide investment approach has significant impacts on the lessening of life loss due to flooding across both the Sacramento and San Joaquin River watersheds. On the slide, you'll see approximately 20% reduction in the San Joaquin or Sacramento Valley and about 80% in the San Joaquin. Next slide, please. Chapter 3 also discusses the priorities and long-term outcomes for ecosystems in the watershed. Drawing on information pulled from the 2022 conservation strategy, this update highlights the need to continue to prioritize actions for ecosystem resilience and various nature-based solutions associated with flood management. In Chapter 3, you'll find a policy spotlight on expanding nature-based solutions and engineering with nature. Additionally, Chapter 3 discusses how the sustainable use of agricultural lands can help achieve flood and ecosystem outcomes. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Chapter 3 builds upon the 2017 performance tracking effort as it further develops intended outcomes, indicators, and metrics for measuring progress of flood management implementation actions across a set of societal values. The 2017 update introduced this outcome-based framework and introduced 4 societal values, including public safety, ecosystem vitality, healthy economy, and other enriching experiences. For 2022, we have added a 5th value to track progress towards, which is equity and social justice. Chapter 3 also begins discussing how this performance tracking can be implemented. The graphic on the slide shows a potential way that specific outcomes can start to be tracked and displayed. Next slide, please. The 2022 update highlights that while it is costly to prepare for and help prevent flood-related disasters, it is many times more costly to respond to and recover from a flood after it occurs. Implementation requires shared responsibility and sufficient and sustainable funding from federal, state, and local partners. Chapter 4 lays out the current understanding of costs for implementing the state system-wide investment approach over the next 30 years. The chapter discusses how the CVFPP helps highlight and guide states' investment needs in the Central Valley. It provides updated costs for capital ongoing investment over 30 years, including laying out historical spending trends on flood management across all levels of government, aggregating all the potential project information gathered from DWR implementation programs and the regional flood management planning groups, develop the current understanding of the overall costs for implementing the state system-wide investment approach over 30 years. For the 2022 update, that investment need is laid out as 25 to 30 billion broken into those capital one-time costs as well as continuing to build on the 2017 effort to highlight the ongoing costs that are needed to help the implementation piece. Additionally, building on the 2017 investment strategy effort, Chapter 4 evaluates scenarios for funding this type of investment, developing a funding plan. Next slide, please. Chapter 4 also includes an imperative to act. We must act swiftly to implement innovative cross-sector flood management strategies. For example, we must value a resilient flood system's contribution to broader policy challenges such as groundwater management and ecosystem stewardship. We must invest boldly over the next 30 years, including investing in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as with landowners and non-governmental organizations. We must build institutional capacity, move projects forward, and leverage each flood system partner's unique capacity for funding and advocacy. And then we must protect the Central Valley's most vulnerable communities, acknowledging and correcting historic inequalities. Next slide, please. We must also continue to evolve away from practices that constrain nature and towards those that work with nature, recognizing the risk reduction and ecologically regenerative power of multi-benefit flood systems. We also must continue to identify the most appropriate path forward to reducing risk among Central Valley's most vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. In summary, we must act now to minimize the next inevitable flood disaster. Sorry, it's not if, it's when a flood disaster will occur. We need to act now to prepare. Flood management solutions must span traditionally siloed water sectors and look across the watershed to become more effective in our planning and implementation. Ambitious investments are imperative over the next 30 years to continue to battle the effects of climate change. Vulnerable communities will not be left behind. We cannot leave them behind as we plan and implement our systems. They must have a seat at the table. And then we must continue the incredible work that's been done over the last 15 years or so of collaboration between federal, state, local, and tribal partners. Now I will be handing it back to Ruth for next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Again, this is Ruth Darling with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and I'll just walk through the remainder of the presentation detailing the public hearing and comment process. So this is our milestone slide. This indicates the flood plan as well as its associated documents that Mary touched on in the beginning of the presentation and when they were released for public review. The flood system status report, state plan of flood control descriptive document, and conservation strategy are linked on the board's website as well as DWR's website. So if you go to the board's homepage, it'll be pretty obvious on where to find these documents. The last is the CVFPP process. So we are in the middle of our public hearing process and during the 45-day comment review period. And as I indicated earlier, we will be hosting public workshops in July and August. Next slide, please. And just some more details on our milestones. The public draft was released on April 21st with a 45-day comment period. We've held 3 public hearings so far, including tonight, and the comment period closes on June 6th. Next slide, please. So the public hearings in Sacramento and Stockton were hybrid meetings. Members of the public were able to join at the venue itself or it virtually through a Zoom link, or they could watch it live stream. Public comments can be received through email or mail, and directions on how to submit public comments are also on the board of DWR's websites. We did send out email blast on April 21st, indicating that the plan had been released for public review, and then did our website postings as well. Next slide, please. And there you go. Thank you. So public comments can be submitted through email. There's a reviewer guidance that is posted on our website. There's also a link provided on this slide. There's an electronic comment form available for folks to utilize that helps categorize comments. And there's an email address at the CVFPP to submit comments electronically. And comments via mail can be submitted to Jason Sidley at the address on the screen. All this information is also posted on the board and DWR's website. And as I detailed earlier, this is the information for our 3 public hearings. Again, we had a hearing in Stockton on May 12th and Sacramento on May 16th, and then as well as this evening. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it back over to President Dolan to begin the public comment process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Darling, Ms. Ramirez, Mr. Sidley, very helpful, even to those of us who've seen this presentation a few times, and hopefully helpful to our audience this evening. So let me just go through a bit of protocol. As I stated when I opened this is a hearing. This is a hearing on the plan. A hearing is different than our board meetings. It is a time for us to receive comments. Staff will be listening, board will be listening, they will be recorded. I think I said, and we said at the beginning, this meeting is being recorded to be sure we have the comments. At the conclusion of the public time, which ends June 6th, the comments from the hearings, the comments from emails, the comments from mail will be reviewed and organized by staff. And then at that point, the board will be scheduling workshops. These are still to be determined. We don't actually have the schedule, but there will be workshops, plural, on topics of the plan and the plan itself. And that will culminate sometime early fall with the board making the decision on how to adopt the plan and whether amendments or revisions need to be included. So at this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Jones, our board clerk, to indicate if people who are online with Zoom have raised a hand and wish to speak. I'm going to ask him to announce 2 names. The first one will be the person I will call on to talk. The second is the one to get ready. And then I will call on the first one and the second one to get ready. We'll have Mr. Jones give me names two at a time. Once we have determined that all who have raised their hands through the Zoom, I will ask if there are any who called in to do that. And that's by hitting *9. We'll see that you want to speak and you'll be called upon. So hopefully that makes sense. We're hoping that the comments are somewhat around 3 minutes. I'll be a bit generous, but we're hoping no one really consumes all the time, if you don't mind. We do want to hear from you, and that will be the point of this meeting. So, ready to go. Mr. Jones, do you have some folks who have raised their hand?
Yes, we have one raised hand from Brenda Guston.
Okay. And so no others besides that. Ms. Guston, you are going to be unmuted and we will receive your comment. Good evening. Brenda Guston, are you there?
Sorry, one moment. I think we're having an issue. Oh, she should be able to talk now.
Now I can.
Well, we all understand that. So good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, first of all, for creating such a thorough draft plan to deal with the future flooding concerns in Sacramento. And I appreciate your professional expertise and apologize for recommendations you may well have covered from the comments I make tonight. In section 1.1 of the plan, it emphasizes on nature-based solutions such as widening the river corridors and expanding floodplains to allow riverine habitats and species to be resilient and adaptable to projected changes in temperature, precipitation, and hydrology. Because of this, I wonder if the draft can further state the necessity to preserve and maintain all existing floodways by not allowing fill-ins or rezoning to allow development. This section states plans to expand floodplains, and so I wonder, is it possible to plan implementation first where there is currently no existing development? Specifying areas as described just now will further reduce the financial demand needed for local and federal funding of flood risk reduction projects addressed in section 1.42 and 1.43. This could also help in addressing the concerns in 1.31 for climate resilience, wherein section 1.3 states that climate change is here and is impacting California now. It further states there is an urgency and resolve with which we must act to adapt to the current threats and prepare for even greater threats in the future. I wonder if it's possible to identify in the draft all areas along the river that already include nature-based solutions that help provide resiliency and counter the negative effects of climate change on the flood system and ensure they remain intact. As I've done my review, I definitely may have missed some of these, and so yet I wanted to have public comment. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your comment. It definitely is recorded, will be considered.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, do we have any other raised hands?
We don't have any other raised hands, President Dolan, but we do have a written I guess I misspoke. We have a couple now. So we
Okay.
have one Matt Conover, I believe,
Okay,
and then Jeffrey Twitchell after that.
okay. All right, Mr. Conover, Matt Conover, you are up. Good evening. Someone needs to unmute him. Or perhaps you do it yourself, sir. I can see your name, but you're muted. So maybe some help.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Welcome.
Hi, I'm with John McCormick Company. We're in RD 1002, which is on the northeast corner of the Delta near I-5 and Franklin Boulevard, where the launch shaft for the tunnels will be built and take its southwest diagonal tunneling underneath the Delta of San Joaquin. After it takes a diagonal northwest draining southeast from Hood and Cortland, they're projecting that they won't be affected by most likely scenario flooding levels very deeply, and that it'll subside. But we've had serious flooding here in 2 or 3 prior floods that caused the closure of I-5 for weeks, and we were 10 to 15 feet deep. And it's going to be aggravated by the refusal or current plan to not dam the Cosumnes up in the canyon there. And apparently you're going to try to comply with that. You're already using eminent domain in Rio Vista for mitigation acreage, condemning farmlands when the saltwater is climbing up the river past the legal limit at the 3 Mile Slough area and going up into the Yolo Bypass and Hastings Tract and Cache Slough. And that salinity got up all the way to Cortland in 1937. Can't have saltwater being pumped onto crops. We have vineyards among our relatives down at 3 Mile Slough. We're going to have that same problem all the way up here as long as this drought's going on. And though the floods can push it on out, the alternating extremes and the projections are going to allow it to come back up again. So this demo project at False River should be adapted for lower end of the sloughs on the west side on the Sacramento River, as well as the McKellamie. We are potentially going to have active breaking of levees and the head of the McKellamey River here, where Snodgrass Slough comes down and joins into Lost Slough. This is draining the Cosumnes and the McKellamey, and the McKellamey and floodwaters gets up high and floods down Lost Slough and comes down over the topping 18, 20-foot levees. Talking to FEMA and the county about projections with new satellite maps that are going to take 4 more years to get out. They're talking about mean sea level being 4 feet higher, us having to lift our buildings 5 more feet to get out of the active flood heights within the next 10 years. And to have the Bay Area Council of Governments asking for breaking down levees, reinforcing the Delta Stewardship Plan idea for expanding these floodplains, being under your maps, all the Delta Stewardship Council maps, and the Nature Conservancy that's buying up land around here. We're under a crosshatch zoning pattern that's going to flood all the way up most of the reclamation district to almost to Stone Lake's Refuge. It's real intimidating, and we're not getting much traction asking at all levels to do the job of flood control on the Cosumnes. It overflows into the McKellamey and goes into Lodi. It affects Elk Grove with the train that had the levee collapse and derailment of 25 cars. So, combination.
Mr. Driver, are you able to wrap up perhaps?
Pardon me?
Are you able to perhaps wrap up your comments?
Yes, I'll declare it done now and submit the rest in writing.
That would be very helpful. Sounds like you have a lot to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have Jeff Twitchell? Mr. Twitchell, are you ready? And Ryan, do we have any other after that person?
After Mr. Twitchell, I don't believe we have any attendees present, but there is a written comment that we received as an email that the woman wanted read into the record.
Okay, we'll do that after we allow Mr. Twitchell to speak.
Okay, I apologize. Once again, we do have another raised hand from the email address.
They're popping up, aren't they? All right, well, I'll wait for that name here. So let's see if we can get Mr. Twitchell online.
Can you? I'm Jeff.
There you are. We can hear you. Good evening.
Thank you, Madam President Dolan. Yeah, my name's Jeff Twitchell, and as a senior consultant of GI Consultants, I've been quite occupied over the past 4 years with advancing the DWR funded small community flood risk reduction feasibility studies right in Matt Conover's neighborhood for the 6 Delta legacy communities in Sacramento County. And to a lesser degree, I also provided some input on the Yolo County communities of Yolo and Nice Landing. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the feasibility studies and how I feel they need to be higher elevated in your current CVFPP update. The studies for the 5 Sac County communities were just completed in February of this year. And the City of Ileton's community study is scheduled for completion here before July 1 within the next 45 days. I thought you should folks know as well, a couple of these communities have submitted pending Prop 68 grant applications accompanying with BRIC NOIs with Cal OES, and they're namely for the disadvantaged communities of Ileton and Locke to potentially implement flood risk reduction measures identified in the studies and potentially implement a new flood insurance program for the Delta region that we hope can maybe morph into larger segments of the entire Central Valley project area. A key thing I want to share is that the Sac County projects, part of their DWR funded studies, we developed at the request of the George Booth of the floodplain administrator for the county is Esri story maps, web-based story maps for each individual community, namely Hood, Cortland, Locke, Ride, and both sides of Walnut Grove, both east and west. And these websites really give you a better idea of what the flood risks are for each of these communities, which will show you that they're subject to deep flooding in excess of 10 to 15 feet, over some of the rooftops if there were to be a levee breach in the area. And they also identify the key preferred flood risk reduction management actions. And obviously they host the reports and and all the supporting technical appendices. In reviewing, your update plan, including the overview of the regional planning areas, there's unfortunately little or no discussion on the small communities in the Lower Sac North Delta RFMP. It's totally silent. But I think and hope this is largely due to the subject studies not being completed until recently over this last couple of months. So we also noticed that the link for the in the current document for the Lower Sac North Delta RFMP is inactive. And at the same time, we're hoping that we could have the county and the city of Ileton's websites linked in the reference area, or ideally in the report itself. It's just some thoughts going forward. Through our study and planning efforts, I think significant progress is being made on the community-based flood insurance program for the Delta region, with the Delta region GAD being recently launched by the citizens of Ileton, recently here on last March 29th. And there's interest, I hear, by both the director of DWR and the state insurance commissioner's office to further explore community-based insurance programs for not only the Delta, but also, the larger part of the planning area. I just want to hit on a couple. If I run out of time, I can submit these comments in writing, but one common thing that we're finding, and I see it's somewhat consistent too with some of the challenges up in the middle and upper Sac region, and that's addressing existing known DWR flood system repair sites, critical and serious sites that remain outstanding. And I know some of the folks in some of the Delta Legacy communities in Hood and in Cortland have opened a dialogue with DWR to get some of this attention, but I think there's really a lack of adequate funding available. There's no real funding to take on these multi-year projects. So hopefully the plan can come up with some solutions on this or advance that effort.
All right. Well, we do hope you put it in writing and appreciate your comments and your information.
Okay, thanks. I have more to offer in writing.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Jones, the next name?
Our next speaker is Whaley500@yahoo.com.
Whaley500 at Yahoo. I'm thinking you might have another one.
Yeah, my name's Dan Whaley. Can you hear me?
Mr. Whaley, yes.
Yeah, my name's Dan Whaley. I am the chairman of the Delta Legacy Communities, a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. And we have a board member from each of the 11 Delta Legacy communities, 9 of which are in your floodplain. We also include Knightston and Bethel Island. But what we see as significant is that there are real benefits to improving and protecting these levees, and the DWR is aware of them. The flood protection plan should include them, and how we address that is very important. I noticed in a bunch of this stuff, they talk about a 30-year plan that has to move quickly. Well, right now, if we don't protect the levee system, we're not going to be able to deliver water anywhere. And so the critical sites have to be addressed. Otherwise, the amount of money that it's going to cost for a failure is unbelievable. And so we will try and submit some written comments. We do appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And we know that it's difficult to predict, but science should be current, and we can't let the saltwater intrusion occur. As little water as there may be in the reservoirs, we need to keep draining it out, and we need to keep using that water to protect our very valuable delta. And those are my comments. Thank you, Dan Whaley.
Thank you, Mr. Whaley, for your comments. Yes, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of money we got to figure out how to achieve. Mr. Jones, is there any other raised hands for the next one?
There doesn't look like there's any right now, but I will pause just to see if we have any late additions.
All right, we'll make that. Do we have people who have joined by telephone only?
Not that I can tell. It doesn't seem like it.
Okay. So I'm going to ask one more time, perhaps two more times. If someone wishes to provide a comment, we need you to raise your hand in the raise hand icon in Zoom so that we can call on you. And please know that public comments will be received by email and by US mail through June 6th. And the board will be holding workshops on the comments, topics of the plan, concerns, and the whole process of updating and adopting this plan. Going once, twice. It appears that that concludes those who have indicated they wish to speak. Do I have
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, that is correct, President Dolan.
All right.
And like I previously mentioned, we do have the email public comment if
All right.
you want me to read that into the record.
If you could, is it possible to put that one PowerPoint slide up that shows the email and the address for US mail? Is it possible to do that? Because it looks like we are close to ending this hearing.
Okay, so in the meantime, I'll read the public comment. Dear CVFPP members, thank you for addressing the serious concerns regarding flooding due to climate change facing our Sacramento region. Based on the extensive facts noted in the 288-page public draft, I respectfully request the draft further emphasize the need to maintain existing floodways and expand existing floodways where there is no existing development to further protect communities, land, habitat, and wildlife. Moreover, I respectfully request that the draft restate as articulated in existing rules, regulations, state and federal laws, a commitment to not consider infill and/or development within a greater area near floodways to protect existing communities, near floodways, tourist asset, wildlife, and fish habitat for the Sacramento region. The state of California and our country is recognized by both federal and state Wild and Scenic Rivers Acts. Thank you for your attention to these concerns and for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for remembering to read that. Have you received any others that wish to be read?
No, that was the only
Okay.
public comment from Lisa Phoenix.
That's what I understood. So we received the other comments. So I just want to say to those of you who have listened who have heard the presentation. I hope it's been informative. That's our purpose. Please pay attention through the summer as we have workshops of the board, and then into early fall as we look to adopting the plan. It doesn't end with the adoption of the plan. The board and the departments, we will work together. We are aimed to implement what needs to be done, not just say what needs to be done. So we appreciate everyone's participation this evening. Thank you all board members for your attention. And unless someone wants, any board member, anyone thinks something needs to be said, I will adjourn this hearing. Good night and be safe, everyone.
Thank you, President Dolan. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Thanks, President Dolan.
Thank you all. Thank you, Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.